The Norse sagas are dominated by a specific rhythm of life, one measured in swords and fire, where authority was violently taken and violently held. King Harald Halfdanson occupied the center of this world. Over 10 years, he would systematically dismantle the power of rival chieftains and forge Norway through a decade of calculated slaughter. Yet, on the day his supremacy was finally recognized, this fearsome warlord did something that completely defied the logic of his era. During his wedding feast, surrounded by the men he had led through years of bloodshed, the conqueror of Norway sank to his knees to serve food to his new bride. To understand how a man who spent his life forcing others to submit ended up voluntarily on the floor, we have to look back at the 10 years of unbroken dominance that led him there. 10 years earlier, Harald had sent heavily armed messengers to the estate of King Eric. Their task was simple: claim Eric's daughter Gyda as Harald's wife. He expected immediate compliance. Instead, the messengers were met with scorn. Gyda looked at the men and laughed, dismissing Harald as a little king ruling over a fraction of a fractured land. She pointed to the neighboring realms. Denmark and Sweden had single, unified rulers. Norway, however, was split among dozens of warring chieftains. Gyda sent back a clear message. She would only marry Harald if he conquered every last one of them. When the messengers returned with this staggering rejection, Harald didn't punish them. He laughed out loud and made a public vow to the gods. He swore that he would not cut or comb his hair until he was the sole king of all Norway, or until he died trying. The bloodiest geopolitical consolidation in Norse history was set in motion because a teenage girl refused to settle for a minor lord. Within weeks, the anvils were ringing. Harald sent war arrows across the valleys, rallying an army for a relentless march north, south, east, and west. His campaigns were brutal and efficient. Farms were burned to the ground. Rival armies were crushed in the field. Surviving chieftains were forced to surrender their weapons, kneel before Harald, and place their heads physically between his knees in total submission. As the seasons turned into years, the king kept his oath. His uncombed blonde hair grew into a massive, tangled mat, earning him a new name across the fjords: Harald Shockhead. That wild mane became a psychological weapon. It was a terrifying physical reminder to every remaining rival that the king's violent vow was still active. The king's unyielding momentum ensured the war never slowed. Until his hair was cut, the conquest of Norway was never truly over. The final resistance against this unified rule gathered in the deep enclosed waters of the western fjords. The last independent kings allied together to break Harald's momentum. Hundreds of massive, dragon-prowed ships dropped anchor in the narrow waterways. The fjords were completely choked with timber, effectively turning the sea into a sprawling, floating battlefield. The combat was uniquely brutal. Men threw heavy hooks to drag the drifting hulls together, creating platforms for hand-to-hand slaughter, where warriors leaped from gunwale to gunwale with swinging axes. Hours of fighting left the waters red. The rival kings were killed, their men drowned, and any survivors fled far across the sea to places like Iceland and Ireland. By surviving the slaughter of the sea fight, Harald eradicated the final obstacles in his path. He had achieved total supremacy. At a victory feast shortly after the battle, Harald turned to his earls and asked for their judgment. They confirmed the reality: there was no king but him in all of Norway. The oath was fulfilled. Harald bathed, put on fresh clothes, and sat quietly as an earl finally took a blade and a comb to the 10 years of tangled growth. The court was stunned by the transformation. Underneath the matted mane was smooth, golden hair. The men immediately dropped the title Shockhead and renamed their ruler Harald Hairfair. His very first act as the undisputed monarch was to summon his uncle. He sent him riding straight back to Gyda with a single message. The task she demanded was done. Harald used his ultimate victory to fulfill a decade-old transaction with the woman who had demanded his greatness. Harald rode across the country with a massive retinue, dressed in velvet and gold. When they reached King Eric's estate, 3 full days of feasting began. This photograph shows an ancient Thor's hammer pendant. During the ceremony, Harald stepped up to the crossbench where Gyda sat and placed a holy hammer just like this one into her sanctify the union. Then came the transfer of domestic authority. Taking a rusted iron key similar to this historical artifact, Harald physically tied a ring of keys to Gyda's belt. This was a binding legal action. By handing over the keys, he made her the absolute, unquestioned mistress of his new kingdom's vast estates and wealth. These rituals were calculated, legal transfers of power. The new queen now held genuine authority over the unified realm. Later that evening, the celebration reached its peak. Servants stepped forward carrying the bride's ceremonial meal in heavy golden dishes. Before they could serve her, Harald stepped in. He stopped the thralls and took the heavy golden platter from their hands. As his battle-hardened men watched in total silence, the giant warlord sank to the floor. The man who had spent 10 years forcing the rest of the world to its knees was now kneeling to serve food to Gyda himself. For the warriors in that hall, the sight was a radical conclusion to a decade of war. The king who had knelt before no one ended his rise to power by voluntarily serving the woman who set it in motion.